Okay, let's dive right into this explainer by completely shattering that pristine white marble illusion of Rome's beginnings. We're about to embark on a sweeping 2,000-year journey that's going to totally change how you view the ancient world. So forget the gleaming statues and those perfectly orderly legions for a second, because the reality of how this legendary civilization was actually forged, it's far more chaotic and, frankly, a whole lot more fascinating. You see, in the very beginning, Rome wasn't some grand, sprawling capital. It was a mess. I mean, literally just a few mud huts sitting on a marshy riverbank along the Tiber. It was incredibly fragile, completely surrounded by older, wealthier, and way more powerful rival kingdoms. Honestly, by all historical logic, Rome should have been wiped off the map before it even got started. Yet miraculously, it survived. It survived and it evolved to forge the laws, the languages, and the architecture of the modern world. So here is our roadmap for today as we track Rome's shifting governments. We'll go from mud huts to mighty kings, look at the Republic of Balance, explore conquests and consequences, witness the Republic's fall, enter the Golden Age of Emperors, and wrap up with crisis, division, and legacy. Starting with Section 1, Mud Huts to Mighty Kings, From Myth to Monarchy. Born from some pretty bloody myths right on the banks of the Tiber, the era of the Seven Kings is really what built Rome's physical and cultural bones. You had figures like Numa bringing in religious order, and later on, Etruscan kings engineering massive, ambitious projects, like the Cloaca Maxima, just to drain the local swamps. But this whole era ended super abruptly in 509 BC. A violent, shocking scandal involving the king's son sparked a massive revolt, and that forced the royal family into exile forever. And that overthrow of the kings set up this brilliant core Roman paradox. The Republic was explicitly created to limit human ambition. By replacing a lifelong king with two annually elected consuls who could actually veto each other, Rome transformed power. It went from being a permanent, dangerous privilege into a shared, temporary responsibility. Which brings us to Section 2, the Republic of Balance, Power and Parity. Now, the Republic was designed to survive ambition, sure, but it was intense class struggle that truly hammered their government into shape. You had the wealthy patricians hoarding all the power, while the plebeians, the everyday farmers and soldiers, were the ones out there doing all the bleeding for the city. So what did they do? The plebeians essentially went on strike. They literally walked out of Rome, and it worked. They forced the creation of the 12 tables, which were publicly written laws, and they got the tribune of the plebs, an office created solely to protect commoners. It ended up forging this highly flexible system of constant, really tense negotiation. All right, moving into Section 3, Conquests and Consequences, Expanding the Borders. As Rome expanded, they inevitably collided with the maritime superpower of the day, Carthage. And we really need to pause and zoom in on a defining moment of the Second Punic War. 50,000. That is how many Romans died in a single day at the Battle of Cannae. The Carthaginian general, Hannibal, was heavily outnumbered, but he used sheer geometry to defeat brute force. He created this bowing crescent formation that purposely fell back, which essentially tricked the densely packed Roman legions into a sack. Then his cavalry snapped the trap shut from behind. It was, without exaggeration, an absolute slaughter. But if Rome had a superpower, it was their absolute refusal to accept defeat. Enter Scipio Africanus. At the Battle of Zama, Scipio adapted brilliantly. Instead of using traditional block formations, he left wide vertical lanes in his lines, so Hannibal's terrifying charging war elephants just ran harmlessly through the gaps. He then took Hannibal's own encirclement tactics and used them against him. Rome won, and they became the undisputed masters of the Mediterranean. But, ironically, this massive new influx of wealth and enslaved people would slowly begin to poison the Republic from the inside out. That takes us to Section 4, The Republic Falls, Ambition over Law. Going into the chaotic final century BC, unpaid soldiers started becoming vastly more loyal to their individual commanders than to the Senate back in Rome. And we see this terrifying reality culminate in pure military genius with Julius Caesar at the Siege of Alesia. Facing a massive Gallic uprising, Caesar couldn't just storm the enemy fortress, so he built a 10-mile wall completely around it to starve them out. But then, a massive relief army arrived to attack Caesar from behind. His solution? He simply built a second wall, this time facing outward. Caesar's men fought and won inside what was essentially a terrifying fortification donut, securing Gaul and cementing the unbreakable, almost fanatical loyalty of his legions. And it was exactly that loyalty that led to this incredibly traumatic moment. Ordered by a terrified Senate to disband his army, Caesar stood at the Rubicon River, uttered those famous words, "The die is cast," and crossed the border with his troops. It was the absolute point of no return. It ignited a brutal civil war, led directly to his brief but highly effective dictatorship, and ended violently with his bloody assassination right on the Senate floor by men who actually thought they were saving the Republic.
On to Section 5, the Golden Age of Emperors, the Imperial Machine.
So, Caesar's brilliant heir, Augustus, is the one who finally ends the civil wars and transforms the shattered republic into this incredibly efficient imperial machine. The guy was an absolute master of propaganda. He initiated the Pax Romana, ruling with total, unquestioned authority, but cleverly dressing it up in old Republican traditions so he wouldn't meet the same fate as Caesar. He brought order, regular taxes, and massive infrastructure to millions of people. But, it wasn't all perfect. He suffered some catastrophic setbacks, too, like losing 3 entire legions in the terrifying Teutoburg forest ambush, which permanently halted Rome's expansion to the north.
And honestly, you just have to love the bizarre, kind of insane history hidden right behind Rome's dignified marble facade. Because absolute power, it definitely bred absolute madness. You had Caligula literally declaring war on Neptune and forcing his soldiers to whip the ocean waves. You had Nero demanding captive audiences for his terrible lyre playing while Rome burned. But then you also had really pragmatic soldier emperors like Vespasian, who actually funded the Colosseum by taxing public toilets, famously joking that money does not smell. And later on, you get Commodus, who bankrupted the state just so he could play dress-up as a gladiator in the arena. Over time, imperial strategies started to shift just as wildly as the rulers themselves. Emperor Trajan pushed the empire to its absolute maximum physical limits, bringing in literal tons of gold from Dacia. But his successor, Hadrian, he was a realist. He looked at the map, realized the empire was getting dangerously overstretched, and immediately pulled back. He transitioned Rome to defensive consolidation, building physical barriers like Hadrian's Wall in Britain, and focused the empire's wealth inward on stunning architectural marvels like the Pantheon.
Finally, we reach Section 6, Crisis, Division, and Legacy, a Fractured World.
Eventually, the staggering weight of the Roman system began to crush itself. This happened during the terrifying crisis of the 3rd century. For 50 long years, it was an absolute nightmare. We're talking plagues, hyperinflation, and constant civil war. The military basically became a political weapon, producing a mind-boggling 26 different emperors in just half a century. The map itself literally fractured into 3 separate empires, the Gallic in the west, the Palmyrene in the east, and a rapidly collapsing Roman center right in the middle.
Rome was only saved from total annihilation by a soldier named Diocletian. He realized a really harsh truth. The empire was simply too massive for one man to govern from a single city. So he instituted the Tetrarchy, dividing authority among 4 rulers across 4 regional capitals. It was a radical, desperate shift, but it kept the empire alive by completely reorganizing its administrative and military machinery.
And that decentralization is what paved the way for Constantine and some truly monumental shifts. Constantine legalizes Christianity, ending centuries of brutal, systemic persecution. But even more profoundly, he takes the beating heart of the empire and moves it away from Rome, dedicating a brand new, highly defensible, incredibly wealthy capital in the east, Constantinople. By 395 AD, the empire formally split in 2 for good. So the empire splits into 2 completely different worlds. The Latin-speaking West was financially ruined, its armies were stretched and possibly thin, and it eventually crumbled under the weight of Germanic migrations, plunging into the Dark Ages. But the Greek-speaking East, they were protected by the impenetrable walls of Constantinople. They leveraged immense trade wealth and incredibly shrewd diplomacy to survive, and actually thrive for another 1,000 years as the Byzantine Empire. Which brings us to the end of our journey today and leaves us with one final, deeply provocative question. Did Rome ever truly fall, or did it just evolve? Because think about it, every single time you look at our modern legal systems, admire monumental architecture, or even just use the calendar hanging on your wall, you are seeing the direct, living echo of a civilization that started as nothing more than a few mud huts on a riverbank. It's a legacy that literally continues to shape our daily lives. Keep exploring, and thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.